So good morning, everyone. I'm Rabbi Shankman, Washington Hebrew Congregation. I am so excited to be part of this Empty Nesters program. These have really been such wonderful moments for us to share. And as we get started, I wanted to share a few brief instructions. One, as I've already asked, we invite you to remain muted. And also I invite you, if you have a question that you would like asked of our speaker, our author, I invite you to send that message to me or send the question to me in the chat, as I'll be guiding those questions a little bit later in our conversation this morning. I also want to let everyone know that our event is being recorded on Zoom. So if you, I'm just letting everyone know so that if you are someone who would prefer to not be on video, if it's being recorded, you can choose to stop your video. But we invite you to, it's so wonderful to see everybody's faces and to be together. And I know we're going to have a wonderful bit of time here together. And so we're gonna get started. And a huge thank you to Ruth Seif and to Jeff Bergman. Ruth is here today, as always, with us. Jeff was with us. Some of you saw him at the beginning. Holly just had knee replacement surgery yesterday, so he is where he needs to be, focused on her, but he still made the time to be with us for a few minutes this morning. So we're so grateful to them for organizing this and other opportunities. And I am so excited and thrilled to welcome Janet Skeslein Charles to Washington Hebrew Congregation's Empty Nester Book Group. Her parents, Barb and Ed, are here as well, and now you can see their faces beaming. So I'm sure whatever I say in terms of introduction will not do her justice. It's always having the parents there to witness. I'm sure I'll try to share and meet what they would say about their daughter. I know how proud they are. Janet Skeslein Charles is joining us today from, as she said, some of you heard, from her office in Paris. She's the award-winning author of Moonlight in Odessa, which was published in 10 languages. Her shorter work has appeared in reviews such as Slice and Montana Noir. She grew up on the plains of Montana, then spent 2 years in Odessa, Ukraine as a Soros teaching fellow. She taught English, French, and creative writing for 15 years, first in Ukraine, then in Montana, and finally in France. Janet first became interested in the incredible true story of the librarians who stood up to the Nazi book protector when she worked as a programs manager at the American Library in Paris. So her novel, The Paris Library, will be published in 17 countries. She divides her time between Montana and Paris, and as I mentioned, she's joining us from Paris today. And Janet, we'd love to start by hearing a little bit about your background and how you came to write this book, and perhaps a little bit about the process of writing it as well.
Well, thank you for having me today, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm so excited to be here with you. I think there were two sparks for this book, and the first was growing up in Montana. We lived next to a war bride from Rouen, France, and her name was Claudine Maynard, and she married a GI that she met not far from the Normandy beaches. And she came to the plains of Montana, to a town of population 2,000. And I was always very interested in French because of her, and my parents fostered that love. We had exchange students in the summer, so we had 3 different exchange students, and then I got to go stay with one of those families. So that was, well, 2 of those families. So that was really, even in my teens, my love of French had been cemented that way. My love of travel had really been cemented. So I've always been interested in these women who leave everything behind and start a new life. And I knew even as a 10-year-old child how brave she was to have left everything behind. And when she came to Montana, of course, she couldn't just go home. Once she was here, and that's the case of a lot of war brides. So I was very interested in that. And then, of course, the second spark came when I got a job at the American Library in Paris in 2010, and I learned about this story. And it wasn't on the website, it wasn't in the literature. It was my coworker who had been at the library since the Nixon administration who talked about this story. And that got me curious, and I started researching it. And if you look online, you will find a report, a 15-page report written by Dorothy Reeder, the directress of the library. And the report is marked confidential, and she talks about the days before the occupation and during the occupation.
Oh, so so many follow-up questions to this, but so she was a real person.
Dorothy Reeder, absolutely. But you know, when I was this book went to auction, and so I had interviews with 11 different editors, and one of the editors told me, you know, you just can't have the librarian be named Dorothy Reeder, it's too on the nose. But she was a real person. I didn't make up her name. It is the perfect name for a librarian, a reader.
Mm-hmm. And were you a Francophile growing up? Did you become, as Lily does in the Paris Library? Were you inspired by your neighbor?
Yes, I was having that neighbor. Just everything about her was, you know, very different. Her name was Claudine. I think her daughter's name was Claudette. Her granddaughter's name was Claude, and it was like they were little nesting dolls. I just thought it was very interesting, and just I thought it was very interesting. And then we had the exchange students, which, you know, were my age, teenagers, and just seeing the way they spoke, the way they dressed, how they were was very interesting as well.
So tell us a little bit more about your relationship before, and we'll get into the book, but as sort of setting the backdrop of these places, because you use both Montana and Paris as the backdrop for the stories, and interweaving them together. And I'm curious about that decision to sort of weave together Montana and Paris. And as we were talking about earlier, not always two places that you might put together, and why the back and forth between Lily and Odile.
Yes, Odile, absolutely, rhymes with ordeal.
Montana, and the experience in Paris.
I think I wrote this book for the lilies of the world who come from small towns and who dream, you know, have big dreams, and sometimes they think bigger is better, and of course bigger is just bigger. But I wanted to tell a story about a small town girl, and I wanted to make it just as interesting and rich in detail as a story set in Paris. And I think what's really important about the story is learning to listen to each other. And that's really what Lily does for Odile. Lily listens to Odile when Odile is finally ready to tell her story. And of course, all through the book, Odile listens to Lily. And so I really like that back and forth between them. And of course, I think I love Montana, and as I'm writing Montana in Paris, I'm very homesick for Montana, and I want to write about it. I want to think about it. I am nostalgic for life in the 80s a little bit, before cell phones, before really so much changed, and life was maybe a little slower pace. So I really wanted to be thinking about those things and bring them into my writing.
I loved that you said it in the 80s, as I was a teen in the 80s, and it just sort of brought it all home. I can really relate to Lily, and also to some of the social pieces, which some of those are not just confined to the 80s, but there's just the element of the nostalgia of that time period. So your book really tells stories of both love and betrayal, and betrayal even in the midst of love. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that aspect, the challenges, thinking about in terms of Paris and the Crow letters, which I know, you know, many of us are familiar with that type of reporting that happened, certainly among neighbors. And then also the way in which you juxtapose that in Montana, but in a different way, in terms of, you know, we often have Lily overhearing comments that were being made, and sort of the way those might not have been as life-threatening as those crow letters, but at the same way, those really really damaged her and injured her in lots of different ways, and impacted who she was and influenced how she reacted and how she acted. So I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on those aspects.
You're right that betrayal is a big part of the book, and I think it starts with not listening. I think Paul, for example, really wanted someone to confide in, and he tried to tell Odile, he tried to lighten his burden, but she just couldn't be the person to listen to him. And so at a certain point, he just was full of anger and rage. He didn't have anyone to talk to, anyone to confide to, and he exploded. And Odile really did let her jealousy get the better of her at a certain point, and just made one mistake. Maybe if her brother had been there, she could have maybe confided in him. I don't know. But yes, she was very jealous. And instead of being able to maybe tell Margaret how she was feeling little by little, she too let her feelings spill over with disastrous results. And it's really hard once those words are out. We can't put them back. We can't take them back, and we have to live with the consequences, whether it's hurt feelings or whether it's putting someone's life in jeopardy, whether we know it or not. Our words have consequences, and I think we sometimes forget that, especially now with social media. People type things out and hit send before they really think about the consequences, or they share other people's information on social media without thinking about the consequences. So I think it comes down to really not thinking and putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and thinking how they would feel. I didn't really address the crow letters in that comment. Did you want me to talk about those?
We can come back to that maybe as we get more into the book. I'm going to stay on this on the concept of words and the impact of our words. I came across a really beautiful. I love that the setting was the library, and we'll talk more about books in a little while. But I came across a quote by a Yiddish writer who is a literary critic and historian. He's one of the leading figures of Yiddish cultural work in pre-revolution Russia. His name is Samuel Niger, or I believe that's how it's pronounced. He lived from 1883 to 1955. But he wrote this beautiful passage, which when I think of a library, it is that walking into that space and the smell and the just feeling, as you can see behind me, somebody commented about the books, or maybe your dad did, maybe Ed did. But it really is that feeling of coming home. And I wanted to share this quote before I ask the next question. Books lead us into the society of those great men, we would add, and women, certainly today we would, of those great men and women with whom we could not otherwise come into personal contact. They bring us near to the geniuses of the remotest lands and times. A good library is a place, a palace, where the lofty spirits of all nations and generations meet. And I just thought that was so beautiful. He also, there are some other really beautiful quotes about libraries and books in Jewish tradition, but you reference a number of books throughout the Paris Library. They're sprinkled in the way some people do name dropping. You did that with books, which I imagine are many of your favorites, are the ones that you highlighted and referenced, and you certainly expressed that deep love for literature and reading throughout the book. So I'm wondering what books have inspired you, whether ones that were mentioned in the book and perhaps others as well. What are some of your favorite books? Who are some of your favorite authors? And I'm sure there may be a few who have not read the Paris Library. Many of us will probably already bring to mind some of those you mentioned, but again, it was like meeting old friends, hearing some of those titles in there.
Oh, well, I just want to say how much I love your quote. That's such a beautiful quote. Do you know where he was from?
So Russia, pre-revolution Russia. Here, I'll put that in the chat, and then I can also send it to you after.
Okay.
I have a couple of others I can share later that were not his quotes, but earlier.
So beautiful.
But it really, I mean, I came across that and just thought, wow, he gets it.
Yes.
And for any of us who are bibliophiles and who just love literature, it really speaks. It's what I think brings everyone who is sitting on this Zoom today. It's part of why we're here, in addition to your beautiful, beautiful book.
Well, and I was saying before, I was having some nostalgia for the 80s, but the quote was saying about how we bringing people together and meeting people we otherwise wouldn't meet, and Zoom certainly has done that for readers and authors and book lovers. So that's a positive point of life today. I think when I love to read. I love books. In my family, we all read. We went to the library every week. So it was just something that we love to do. The books I was thinking of this time for this book were books that maybe not everyone has read. For example, I was thinking of Jean Rhys. Jean Rhys is a really popular author here in Paris, but I don't think she's really read that much outside of Paris. And I love her book, and I love her view of Paris. She's in Paris. She's alone a lot of the time. She's poor a lot of the time. She drinks too much. She's very emotional. She has a lot of ups and downs. And her story is really different than a lot of the people's stories that we can read about in Paris, where they're happy, they're drinking cafe au lait by the Eiffel Tower, and it's a very rosy story. Even my story is a little bit like that, because Odile grows up in Paris. She feels very at home in Paris. She speaks French fluently. We see Margaret, who arrives and has these dreams of Paris and expects everything to be really wonderful and ooh la la and romantic, and it's really hard. She's very isolated. She can't speak. She feels like she's being cheated when she goes into the shops. Her husband is gone a lot. So I really like Jean Rhys for that, because she really shows how it feels when you're alone in Paris. And the writing is just beautiful. And I actually read Their Eyes Were Watching God when I was at the University of Maryland College Park, and it just was a revelation to me. I'd never read it before. I'd never heard of Zora Neale Hurston. So I just wanted to include her. I think a lot of Americans have read her now. I think Alice Walker brought her back onto the literary map of America. But I receive a lot of messages from like French and Italian readers who've never read her before and are giving her a try. She has just been retranslated in French. And just to give you an idea, the first translation of her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was called Une Femme Noire, a Black Woman. And now the title is actually translated, Their Eyes Are Watching God. But that first title makes you think, boy, if that's how they translated the title, what did they do with the rest of the story? So I just wanted to, also Dorothy Whipple, who's an English writer, and slipping into her books is just like slipping into a warm bath. It's just an absolute delight. It's so comforting and warm. So I just wanted to talk about some of these authors that I like, and I thought other people would like to.
Well, I certainly enjoyed all the references, and I actually, during COVID, I've been doing a lot of reading. I think that's been a refuge and a sanctuary for so many of us. And certainly having these opportunities to come together to talk about what we've read. But I reread Their Eyes Were Watching God, and having read it years ago, and reading it now in our context today was a very different, just revelations in terms of that, and then also reflecting a little bit more than I did when I was younger on Zora Neale Hurston's life post the book, and how sad that story is, and how it speaks to the times. So thank you for sharing some of your favorites. I think somebody had asked in the chat the name of the writer, Jean Reese. I don't know.
Oh, yes, let me type it here.
That'd be great. Thank you. So I wanted to take a minute to one of the things that I loved was the imagery within your book as well, and one of the ways that was so vivid. I mean, when you described, especially as we were thinking about how people dress, and maybe the difference in 1980s Montana and 1940s Paris, or as many would say, Paris anytime against anywhere else in the world. But there's this image of Odile when we first meet her, Mrs. Gustafson, who is wearing, there's this focus on the red belt. And you just sort of have this image of somebody who is dressed to the nines, and against that backdrop, and that she's always, it seemed like always wearing that red belt, although it that gets changed later on. And I was wondering what was behind that, and whether what the belt represents, and the change in the belt, and the change in dress throughout the book.
Oh, well, we do start with the red belt, and my dad got me a really neat red belt, so I was excited about that. I was going to wear it to my events. When growing up, there was a lady in our small town named Margot Haskett who was always dressed to the nines, and she wore a hat to church, and she always wore a dress, and her heels were about 4 inches, 4 feet, that would be a feet, 4 inches long, and she walked everywhere. So that was even more impressive. And so I did have that image growing up of this woman who stood apart, and she stayed single her whole life, and happily so. And she was the first to tell you. So I was thinking about just that one person that really stands out already, I think, growing up. And I think I did a lot of research for the clothing, and what I found was it was very uncomfortable. Because they had girdles. I read through several years of the Paris edition of the New York Herald Tribune, and there were ads for girdles, and they are just hilarious. I'm really glad we don't do that anymore as women. It's pretty funny. And there was also talk of a Nina Ricci dress, and they had a photo of it in the Tribune, and it was it had squirrel tails. Which is really unique. I'm glad we don't do that anymore either. But concerning the belt, the belt was Margaret's last gift to Odile. And so it was something that had a lot of meaning to Odile. And I suppose anything red, we think right away of Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter and punishment. And I suppose that's very much true in this book, where it was a daily reminder of what she'd done and how she'd hurt the people she loved the most, and the terrible consequences. And so I think when she's able to relieve herself of that burden, it's thanks to Lily in a lot of ways. But when she's walking along the Alexander III bridge, it's trailing down, and she says it's whipping like a whip. And so there is that image of a whip.
Thank you. I'm curious as to who your favorite character or characters are in the book. Was there anyone who you felt particularly connected to or close to, or I know there are some models for some of the characters. Who were your favorite?
My favorite character is Margaret. Margaret really stole my heart, and she wasn't there. Well, she was there at the beginning, because if you open the book, you'll see there's that photo of the American Library in Paris, and there's Margaret standing right there. And when I started researching the book, that was a picture that I saw, and I just imagined who that might be. And so it's really, I feel very lucky to have that image in the book. So there's Margaret standing there in the window of the American Library in Paris. And I really like her because she really struggles. And, you know, a lot of people, when they come to Paris, they have these really romantic ideas of what the city might be. And I think it stays that way sometimes if you're here for a few weeks or for a year and you take advantage of everything. But if you work here and you're in the metro a lot, or you have kind of colleagues that are a little callous, you might have a different view of the city. Margaret was alone a lot of the time, just like Jean Rhys was. And Jean Rhys turned to alcohol. Luckily, Margaret turned to the library.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about Miss Reader, especially since you told us now that she's a real person and was a real person. And I saw the quote that was pulled out that she expressed, and she was adamant that there was a place for everyone at the library. And just the way in which, I'm curious, especially now that you've told us you've read the report, I'm curious how much she and others stood up, and tell us a little bit more about that aspect of the book that was true in terms of the I can't think of the German word for the book protection.
Oh, the Bibliothekschutz, yes. Well, if you'd like, I can show you some pictures of Miss Reader and some of the other characters. I have a few photos that if you want to do a screen share. But what I can say about Miss Reader is she is absolutely exceptional. She came to Paris on her own in 1929. She started at the periodical department, worked her way up to the role of directress in 1936. And in the summer of 1939, the American ambassador put notices in the Tribune that said to Americans, "Go home." And she and her staff decided to stay at the library. And so on day 3 of the war, she started the soldier service. And the soldier service sent books at first to military camps and to canteens, to English and French soldiers. Later, it was expanded to Czech soldiers as well, and to the French Foreign Legion. The soldiers could write in and ask what books they wanted, whether it was in French or in English or both. They could have magazines like National Geographic. It was just really a wonderful way to show the soldiers that they cared, because there was from September of 1939 to June of 1940, there was what they called in France the drôle de guerre, and there wasn't really fighting in France, but yet everyone was mobilized. So the men had a lot of downtime. They were away from home. The conditions were not great. Sometimes they were on farms. Sometimes they were on the Maginot Line, there was just absolutely nothing to do but wait. So it was very meaningful for them to have the books. And I included a thank you note in the book, and that was from a British captain. And the actual letter was much, much longer. So I had to tighten the letter. But it's just to say, also a British matron of a hospital wrote to say how much the Tommies, as she called them, appreciated the books. So this was something that most people would have gone back to the States. She was from Washington, D.C. She worked at the Library of Congress before going to France. When she returned from Europe, she went right back to the Library of Congress, where she worked until she retired. But in the meantime, she raised funds and awareness for the Red Cross in Florida. She went to Bogota, Colombia for 2 years, where she trained librarians. And then she went back to, after the war, she went back to England and to France, where she worked for the Red Cross. So she's someone who's worked on 3 continents in the 1940s. She's absolutely incredible.
Wow. And was her staff as international as, you know, between the staff and those who were, you know, subscribers, but really residents of the library, were they as international as portrayed in the book?
Yes, Boris, the head librarian of the American Library, was Russian, and he later took French nationality, so he was Franco-Russian. One of the trustees, Claire de Chambrun, the Countess from Ohio, she was American, but she married a Frenchman. She became Franco-American. The secretary was Swiss. The bookkeeper was English. There were two Canadians, a mother-daughter team, Evangeline and Olivia Turnbull, who worked at the library. So yes, the staff was very international. The subscribers were international. Today, there are 60 different nationalities represented in the membership of the library.
So I was going to ask you to tell us a little bit about the American Library in Paris today, because you certainly know that well and have spent time there. And I'm curious if you'd share what it is like, what the culture is, and certainly you've already mentioned that the nationalities that are represented, and what a beautiful idea of this beautiful just community that comes together.
Yes, it's well, it celebrated its centennial in 2020. So it was really born of war. The library, the American Library Association's war service in 1917 started sending books. Civilians from Canada and America sent books through the war service to soldiers in Europe and to France, to camp libraries, to hospitals. And so after the war, there was a question of what would we do with these books? And the Paris Library, as it was called then, was just a depot for books. And so they decided, the Countess Claire de Chambrun was one of the first trustees, along with the writer Edith Wharton, the millionaire Anne Morgan. They decided to create a library. And so the library started in war. The library continued through World War II. And today, the staff is just as international as the staff then. They did click and collect through the lockdowns, and the numbers for click and collect were almost as good as in normal times, which just tells you how important the library was to its members. They've continued to do their programming on Zoom, just like we're doing now. So they're reaching an even more an even bigger audience with their events. So it's really a place where people can come together and talk about their love of books.
Thank you. So there are a few questions about characters. And the first is, the question is, are Lily and Odile and Paul and Odile's parents the only fictional characters? Everyone else is based on a real person, even if their story is partially fictionalized.
I would say that the librarians are real, but everyone else is fictional, because you have characters like Mr. Price Jones and Monsieur de Nercier who are fictional. The subscribers, Professor Cohen is fictional. The librarians are real life characters, but everyone else they're fictional.
That's helpful, because one of the questions that's not in the chat to everyone is someone noticed that Professor Cohen's mentioned in the afterwards as having gone to Palestine, and the question was, did she survive the Holocaust? But she's a fictionalized character.
We know that she survived because Odile in Montana has her books on her shelves that have been published after the war. So she turned to writing, and yes.
Thank you. So someone would like, Lynn Schoen asked if we could see the pictures you mentioned. I made you co-host, so you should be able to hopefully share.
Okay. So let's see. So here we have Paris at the time, and where the blue arrow is near the Saint-Lazare train station, and Odile lives right across from that train station. And she sees in the beginning, she talks about the Saint-Augustin Church, which is right here. And then the library would be right about here.
And where are you?
Where am I? I am. That's such a good question. Thank you for asking. I am way over here on the other side. I don't know if you can see me on this. If you follow the Seine River all the way, I'm right about here. Oh, and the church is there too. That church was bombed during World War II, so it had to be reconstructed. The Germans were going for the train station and they missed and they hit that church. So here's the American Library in Paris, so you can just kind of have a taste of it inside. There are 4,000 members with 60 countries. It's the largest English language lending library on the European continent.
Wow.
This is where the library is now. In 1939, it was on the other side of the river. Now it's in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. This is the inner courtyard of the library, and this was on my first day of work. This was the inner courtyard of the library at the time, and I hope you'll remember this picture because I'll show it to you again. So staff, as we said earlier, came from the US, Canada, Russia, France, Switzerland, and England. This was that picture that was shown earlier by Sue. I bought this picture from the Chicago Tribune archives when it went up for sale. It's a little better view of her. I became an obsessive Googler, which is how I found a lot of the photos online that I'm showing you. This is a photo from the American Library, and this is after the US ambassador advised, in view of the situation prevailing in Europe, it is advisable that American citizens return to the United States. So here we have Miss Reader and Mrs. Turnbull putting documents and books in the safe. This is the war service, and we can see that books are being packed for individual soldiers. And we know from the meticulous records of the library that the record for wrapping a care package was 1 minute and 40 seconds, which is pretty good. 100,000 books were sent at that time. And this is a quote from Miss Reader that I really love. "No other thing possesses that mystical faculty to make people see with other people's eyes. The library is a bridge of books between cultures." And I love that image of a bridge of books. So here we have occupied Paris. This is Dorothy Reader. I don't know if this is, for those of you who've read the book, if this is how you imagined her. I actually bought a dress exactly like this. And I was going to wear it to my events, but as you can see, we only see from the neck up for most events. I just think she was really, really a lovely woman. I bought this photo on eBay for $24.99, and it just astounds me that our history is floating around online. Here we have another picture of her, and you can see Washington, D.C. is in the background. You can see I think it's the mall in that photo of her. And this is her at her desk. This is Clara Chambren, one of the original trustees. She was a Shakespeare scholar. She translated Shakespeare into French. She was a novelist as well. If you read the book, you know that she too had to deal with the Bibliothekschutz, the library protector. This is a photo of her at her home. I got this photo off of Amazon. And she, just like Miss Reader, was very interesting. She earned a PhD from the Sorbonne at the age of 48. She wrote about the war in her memoir, Shadows Lengthen, and I was very happy to have her thoughts while I was writing this book. This is the photo of Boris, and you'll remember this photo from earlier, and you can see the plaque and the flowers. So you can see that Boris is at the library with Hélène. I got to interview her during my research. She's in her 80s now, and she said that she went to the library quite a lot with her father, and that she wasn't the teacher's pet, she was the librarian's pet. So luckily she had a lot of love and care from all the librarians, because her mother worked as well. So Boris was often on babysitting duty.
And he was actually shot.
You see a little bit of the characters here. This is Dorothy Reader that I'm showing again and again. She looks different to me. Boris looks the same. These are the mother-daughter Canadian librarians, Evangeline Turnbull and her daughter Olivia. Here we have Peter Ustinov, not the actor, and Helen Fickweiler. Helen Fickweiler came to Paris 3 weeks before the war, broke out and decided to stay. And these two married when they returned to the States. And I got to have exchanges with their daughter, Elizabeth. I will point out this woman right here, she was a mystery woman to us for a very long time because she disappeared. She's here in this photo, which was probably taken in about 1939. And her name is Janet Ettlinger King. And we didn't know what happened to her. And we just found out that she was taken prisoner to Baden-Baden during the war. And she was in prison with her husband, who was an English journalist, and the other diplomats. And the first thing that she did in Baden-Baden in that prison was to start a library. And her collection actually extended to 1,200 volumes. And one of the detainees with her said that the library is what got him through the war and got a lot of people through the war. She was eventually released, and she and her husband returned to the States. So we were really glad to have news of her. Here we have the library plate, the book plate, the American Library in Paris, From the Darkness of War, the Light of Books.
Thank you for just really bringing it all.
Ooh, I can't hear you.
Can anyone else hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Oops. Good. Sometimes Zoom does that. It's one of those crazy things. You'll be on a Zoom, get off, get on the next one, and no one can hear. So I know earlier you mentioned that the importance of our words and the weight carried by our words and thinking about the words we use. And I know that that's an important message of the book. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would hope is the message that people will take away from the story.
Well, I think we don't really know each other. I think we don't really listen to each other, especially today. It's so easy to blast out information, but very few people actually listen. And I think it's very important to listen. I think the whole point of my book is Odile sharing her story with Lily. And if there weren't Lily, there would be no point to the book. So I think we just need to learn to listen.
Thank you. That is certainly something that we've seen in conversation over the last years, and become even that much more aware of the importance of really listening, and not just hearing the words, but recognizing that not every story, not every experience is the same, and being able to not necessarily step into someone else's shoes, because we can't always wear someone else's shoes, but recognize that we all have shoes we wear, that we all have our stories, and that we can not only learn from them, but grow, and we're enriched by the diversity that exists. There's Nancy Corman asked if, for the address of the library, and she was only able to get 9 Rue de...
Well, the library at the time of the war was 9 Rue de Tehran, so it's Tehran Street, like the Iranian capital, Tehran. But that building was destroyed. The building I just showed you, it was destroyed. Now it's a big glass building, and I think it's the headquarters of Dannon. But the library now is on Rue de General Camus.
So I can imagine that there may be, out of all those who are listening today, a number who may add the Paris Library to a list of places to visit when we're able to travel again. And who knows, maybe we'll take an Empty Nesters trip to Paris and be able to in the dress and with the red belt, and be able to actually experience it firsthand. That would really be wonderful. So a question of who's the woman portrayed on the cover?
That's the illustrator of the book. They found that image, or they put together that image. And I've heard a lot of things about book covers lately, because there's so many book covers with women whose backs are turned to the reader. And I actually go to the Red Wheelbarrow Library quite a lot, a bookstore here in Paris, quite a lot, and I think there were at least 10.
And I noticed behind you there are a number of, it looks like there are a few copies of the book, perhaps in different languages.
I think there's one in the US and the UK version, and the rest are just books that I love, like Anne of Green Gables. There's one called The Making of Mrs. Petrakis that's going to come out later this spring. So yes.
Wonderful. So have you been approached about film options for the book?
There was a young man from Italy who said he was going to write the screenplay. Good for him, but Hollywood has not called.
And so what kind of reader are you?
Oh, that's such a good question.
But that was a wonderful question. What kind of reader are you?
Well, I always have to have a pen in my hand. I have a really hard time reading without a pen in my hand, and I love to underline things. And what I love about underlining things is when you read something again 10 years later, what you underline is different because you're different. And so I would say to everyone to underline when you're reading books, because especially if they're books that you love and you know you're going to reread. The perfect example is Their Eyes Were Watching God. I read it one way when I was like maybe about 20 years old, I guess, and I read it as a love story. I read it much later in life, and it was more about it was a friendship story to me. Now if I read it, I think I would be very attentive to other things in the book, about more, just like you did, about Zora Neale Hurston's life and her experiences.
So the question that I know we're all wondering is, what's next? Do you have any projects you're working on, and what can you share with us about what you're working on and any timelines for that, without putting any pressure, just because we all love your book, and I know would love to read more by you.
Well, I am working on another book about another librarian, but my first book is Moonlight in Odessa, and it's set in Odessa, Ukraine, and it's very similar to this book because my interests, I think, in writing are journeys, people's journeys, and how they have to reinvent themselves at different points in their lives. And so that's exactly what has happened with Odile in the book. Something has happened, and we all have to do that at certain points in our life, whether it's through travel, whether it's through getting a job, or getting married. All of these things are big changes in our lives, and how do we deal with the big changes in our lives? So I think that's always going to be my interest in exploring the characters.
And I certainly know that so many of us can relate, especially to, changes, especially the way in which this last year has impacted everyone, and in the way in which our lives have changed and society has changed. And as we now transition to hopefully being able to come together more and more, I think that message of how each of us as individuals approach change, and how we do that together as a community, are such vibrant, dynamic, and timeless messages. So I know we'll look forward. I encourage everyone to read Moonlight in Odessa, and perhaps we can have a conversation about that as well. And then we'll look forward to hearing more when you have more to share. We'll certainly, you now have a community in Washington, D.C. I know you already had connections to the area through your time in College Park, but also just know that we'll look forward. And I know I'm already getting seconds for the idea of an Empty Nesters trip to Paris. And I think that especially, we can think about our maybe an Empty Nesters trip to various locations from the various books that we've been reading. So we'll certainly put Paris at the top of that list, and that would be a wonderful trip to experience. Janet, thank you so much for your time this morning. really, what a gift. And I encourage you, if you have not already read The Paris Library, to read it. I know many people had reached out and said, I'm going to finish it in time. And the only, well, not the only, but one of the drawbacks to the fact that we're on Zoom is we don't have the opportunity to actually have it inscribed with your name, but certainly the connection I know we all feel to you today is your warmth and your love. Certainly your love of books is something that that connects all of us. I wanted to share another little treasure before we finish, which is an earlier Jewish text, earlier scholar, Ibn Tibbon. It's a great name, Ibn Tibbon. It means son of Tibbon, who lived about 1120 to 1190 in Spain. He was a Spanish Jewish scholar. So we had Russia and now Spain, and I actually have two. I'll share them both if that's okay with everyone, because these are beautiful and I can put them in the chat as well. Make books your companions. Let your bookshelves be your gardens. Bask in their beauty. Gather their fruit. Pluck their roses. Take their spices and myrrh. And when your soul be weary, change from garden to garden and from prospect to prospect. So that's one thing he wrote. And the other, he also wrote, cover your bookcases with rugs and linens of fine quality. Preserve them from dampness and mice and injury, for it is your books that are your true treasure. And so, Janet, we thank you for sharing such a treasure with us today. And also, Barb and Ed, we're so happy that you're with us as well. And we hope you enjoyed, and you're welcome to join us again and again. I want to let everyone know that we will be, the Empty Nesters book group will be meeting again on Friday, May 28th. I believe that's the correct date. Ruth, just give me a thumbs up. Yep. For Kristen Harmel's book, The Book of Lost Names, which also starts in Paris. So there's a theme.
And you know what's crazy is she lived in the same building as the American Library in Paris.
Oh my goodness.
She in the today's building, she lived there. Yes. So I met her through a conversation like this and was just stunned. So yes.
So there's this connection. In Jewish tradition, we call that beshert, something that's meant to be. It's like beyond a coincidence. It's sort of this coming together. And I'm so glad I mentioned that, and for you to be able to share that with us. And I love that there are additional connections as we travel this road together. Oh, Janet, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you May 28th, if not before. And again, Janet, our gratitude, appreciation for not just your time today, but the heart that you poured into this beautiful book and for sharing it with us.